Welcome to Casual Friday. Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is my weekly Casual Friday podcast. If you'd like to jump right to a specific point in the video, you can tap or mouse over the video playback area of the screen to reveal the chapter titles and starting points of each section. In this week's podcast, I have tidbits. I have an update in my hand spinning breed study, and an old pair of socks returned to me for some much needed attention. Let's get started. The Minnesota Knitters Guild is the local Knitters Guild that I belong to. I actually belong to also the Knitting and Crochet Guild of the UK. And in the past, I've also belonged off and on to the Knitting Guild Association, also known as TKGA, which is more of a national guild. So I talk about the Minnesota Knitters Guild a lot because I really love it as a resource for knitters, and it's not only for Minnesota knitters. Anybody can join from any place in the world. There's no experience or ability barrier for membership, and like most guilds, their goals are educating knitters as well as doing service knitting for our local community, with local meaning the state typically. So this month I will be on a panel of 4 knitters who have completed the Master Hand Knitting program through TKGA, the Knitting Guild Association. But the 4 of us will talk about our experience going through the program at the time that we went through them. I finished the program 10 years ago. And we'll also talk about what we've done in our knitting lives since completing it, because I imagine we've had different paths after that. The Master Hand Knitting program isn't the only certification program out there. And TKGA isn't the only organization that has knitting-related certification programs. So we'll be talking about some of those other programs to the extent that we are familiar with them. One of the other master knitters also has taken the tech editing course through TKGA, and I have taken the Certified Knitting Instructors course through the CYCA, which is the Craft Yarn Council. So we'll talk about what those experiences were like as well. If you are interested in seeing this program, again, it's Tuesday, May 15th at 7 p.m. Central Time. So the guild does pay its speakers, and the way that they have the money to do that is through the membership dues of its members. But they don't require people who come to meetings to be a member. So if you would like to see this program and you are not a member, you can get a link through the Knitters Guild. And if you'd like to leave a donation, I think the suggested amount is like $5, and that can help offset the cost of paying the speakers for any meeting that you decide you want to attend. This next tidbit is one I talked about last week prior to the presentation. It was a presentation called Knitting in Code by Kristen Howard at McGill University. So I watched the presentation. I really enjoyed it. She talked a lot about the various ways that knitting has been used to pass coded messages, particularly in wartime. And she, as part of the presentation, she presented 2 knitting patterns that she designed that are sort of related to secret codes in knitting. One of them used what's called illusion knitting, and the other one used Morse code. That presentation was recorded, and I saw it show up in my YouTube feed yesterday, so it's available to view on YouTube. So I'll leave links to that YouTube presentation on knitting in code, and then also to links to her Ravelry designer page where you can find those free patterns. So this tidbit showed up in my Twitter feed this morning. It's a new chart for sizing standards that is available through an online magazine called Digits and Threads. It's a Canadian publication. So one of the various movements in creating more diversity and inclusion in the knitting world these past couple of years has been to provide a larger range of sizes. But one of the challenges of size inclusion is that the typical way that you would grade a pattern is to start with a design in one size. And then you would grade it up and down from that middle point, and you would typically use the same sort of ratios and proportions that were associated with the original size in order to get the neighboring sizes. But the problem with that is that the further away that you get from that starting point, the ratios and proportions don't always stay the same. Just because somebody is getting bigger around doesn't mean that they're getting taller and that their frame is changing. And so an additional challenge is that when people get larger, they don't all gain weight in the same places. Some people might get bigger in the arms or bigger in the bust or bigger in the belly. That has created so many challenges to offer size inclusion because there hasn't been these standards. So there's this new chart that was developed by Kim McBrien Evans she started with the existing standard charts from the Craft Yarn Council, which are considered standards. But she also used charts from various sewing pattern companies. She used charts that other knitters who have made their size inclusive charts available online. She included all of those and sort of compiled them in order to come out with a chart that could be used as a standard. She's also used her own experience as a knitter and a teacher in seeing the challenges that people have had getting things that fit them when they are not in that sort of average size that is typically used in order to grade other sizes. So if you are interested in seeing that chart, I'm going to leave a link down below. I hadn't heard of Digits and Threads previously. It turns out that Kate Atherley is one of the co-founders. They publish articles 3 or 4 times per month on kind of a rolling basis. Some of the content is available for free, like this chart. The rest is available only to members, and membership is available on a per month basis or on an annual basis. And if you are a member, you have access to all of their archived articles. And then there's another higher level of membership that also provides this once per month studio hours, it's a virtual talk. So they have different topics that they might talk about in those. So I thought it was great that there is this new size inclusive standard chart that is being provided out for free to the world. But I also was really delighted to find out about another online knitting magazine. This tidbit has been in my Tidbits document for a while, so I'm not sure where I got it. Possibly in my Twitter feed? I really don't know. It's a 16th century Tudor-era child's mitten, and it's in the collection of the Museum of London. I'll leave a link down in the show notes so you can look at it in a more leisurely fashion if you'd like. One of the things that I find fascinating about the various virtual events that I've been able to attend in the past couple of years is to hear museum archivists talk about different textiles in their collections. And a while back, I attended a presentation by a PhD student who was doing conservation and preservation work in a museum as part of her PhD. Now, from what I understand, the difference between conservation and preservation is that preservation is doing what you can to prevent any further deterioration. You're not doing anything invasive at all. Whereas conservation it does involve some hands-on work with the item. It might include cleaning it, and it might include doing some repairs. It's not restoring it to its original state. It's just doing repairs enough to sort of keep the item from deteriorating further. It would be to help support it, for example. The way the PhD student explained it was that the way the repairs are done makes it obvious where the original textile ends and the repairs begin. So they might use a slightly different color of thread or yarn, for example, and they only do enough so that you can tell what the original thing, how it looked and how it was used. This mitten has a mold inside the mitten, and so that is something that can help support the mitten. Can't see the underside, so you don't know what has been done. So I can't tell you if this is something that has been undergone conservation or preservation, and I'm still really not completely sure what the difference is. And I imagine there's a certain amount of crossover in them. But anyway, enjoy the mitten. I certainly did. Last week, I was telling you that my spinning wheel was giving me problems. It was squeaking. I tried oiling it in the one place that it needs oil. I have a type of wheel that doesn't need oil in multiple places, and that hadn't helped. I noticed that when I was spinning, it was squeaking, but then when I was plying, it did not squeak. And I couldn't figure out what the problem was. I got 2 comments last weekend with suggestions in them from other spinners. And at first I thought, oh, that neither one of their suggestions was going to solve the problem. But I kept those 2 suggestions in mind when I sat down and I decided I wanted to troubleshoot the problem and see if I could try a series of things and if that would make a difference. And I solved the problem. And so I want to thank those 2 people whose names I do not know. I'm going to give you guys a tour of my wheel and show you what those 2 suggestions were talking about. This part of the spinning wheel has 3 components to it. This kind of frame right here is called the mother of all. And it holds the flyer, which is this part that spins around here. And then this is the bobbin. So when I'm spinning, if I had some fiber in my hands right here, and I would be treadling, I'd be treadling the wheel clockwise to spin my single, and it would get fed into the wheel and wound onto the bobbin. When I am plying 2 of these strands together, I'd have 2 strands coming in together, and the wheel would be going around in the opposite direction so that those twisted fibers would be spun in the opposite direction. So when I'm spinning a single, the wheel's going clockwise, and when I'm plying, it's going counterclockwise. And what I was noticing was that when I was spinning the singles, I was getting this horrible squeak, and I could hear it from right here. And it wasn't happening when I was plying. So one of the people suggested that I tighten the various bolts. Like she had that problem, and so she had tightened screws and bolts. This particular wheel, the only screw that I could, or bolt that I could think of, was right here. And it's the thing that keeps this business right here. It allows me to take the bobbin on and off. It's just something that holds this bobbin in place. It can get loose or get loose in the winter or tight in the summer as the wood expands. But I couldn't see how that would have any effect on the sound that was going here. That was the only screw or bolt that I could think of. The other person thought that maybe the flyer that I used when I was spinning was the problem, but not the flyer I used when I was plying. And the reason they thought that was typically when you are spinning fiber, you're going to spin until this bobbin is completely full. And so then you'll have 2 or 3 bobbins that are completely full, not ones that barely have anything on them. And so then when you go to ply them together, you need something that's much bigger than this in order to hold the new plied yarn together. And so a lot of times what you'll do is you'll swap out all of this. So you can take off this mother of all, and you take off the flyer and the bobbin. And what you use is a much larger mother of all and flyer and bobbin. I knew that I wasn't swapping it out to ply because I was using the same bobbins. I didn't need to swap anything out. But it did give me the idea of, well, I could swap out my flyer and mother of all and bobbin and see if the bigger ones had the same problem. I started taking it apart, took the bobbin off, I took the flyer off, and then I started taking the mother of all off. Well, the way that you take the mother of all off is that there's this knob right here. And I just think of it as a wooden knob. But you unscrew it. And what you see on the inside, it's a screw. So this is like a screw or bolt. I just wasn't thinking of it as a screw or bolt. And so I started taking it off, and then I realized, oh, I don't need to change the mother of all, because this mother of all will work with yet another flyer that I have, which is called a fast flyer. So I put this back in, and then I put in the fast flyer, and I tried going in both directions, and it was absolutely fine. So then I put the original flyer back in here. I didn't even have to try the jumbo flyer and the plying bobbin or anything like that. Everything was fine. So what it was that over the course of our very dry winter, 4 months, sitting there, the wood had kind of shrunk and changed its shape. And so the wheel, the parts that were screwed together weren't working well together. And all I needed to do was to loosen that up and then tighten it up again. And there's another one at the very bottom. Let me just lift this up. There's one at the bottom too, because if you unscrew that one, then this whole part will flatten for traveling. So that's really nice. So I unscrewed that one as well. But that is how I fixed the problem. And it was all thanks to the two people who made suggestions that I didn't think at first were going to work. But when I thought about them together and then thought about how to troubleshoot it, I got the answer. So I just never would have gotten there thinking about bolts, because I wasn't thinking of this as a bolt. Now that I have fixed the wheel, I have 4 different breeds that I have spun. Since then, I finished spinning the Teeswater. That was what was on my wheel when I put it to the side in November. And then I did Texel, and then the wheel was still squeaking, and then I fixed the wheel, and I did black-faced Welsh. I think it's what it's called. They just are calling it Welsh, but I think there's different kinds of Welsh breeds, and this one is a black wool, so I think it's called black-faced Welsh. And then I did Wensleydale. So this is an up-close look at the Teeswater. It has kind of a sheen to it, and it's not coarse, but the fiber was very long and with very little crimp. It's apparently sometimes used as doll's hair. So it was interesting to spin. I don't know that I'd want to spin with it again, but it was really interesting. This is the Texel. This one is so bouncy. It's just so squishy and bouncy. It's amazing just how different it was from the Teeswater. This is the Welsh. This was actually really nice to spin with. I feel like I really like the yarn I ended up with. It's on the coarser end of yarns, but I think it would be a good outerwear or type of sweater, something where you definitely would wear something underneath it. But I actually liked it quite a lot. This is the Wensleydale. This ended up being, I spun it pretty fine, and I almost feel like I overplied it. I might run it back through the wheel and take out some of the ply and see what that does with it, or take out some of the twist to see if loosening it up would help. It's not bad. It was easy to spin. I just don't like the yarn, and I don't know if I could improve this particular yarn by taking some of the twist out of the ply. So I did spin White-Faced Woodland. It's on the bobbins, and I need to ply it. And then there's one breed left to actually spin, and that is Zwartbles. Zwartbles is really the breed that got me started on searching for other breeds. 4 years ago in the spring during lambing season, I started following an Irish shepherd who breeds Zwartbles sheep in Ireland, and I just was so taken by their sheep, and I found out that she gets her wool processed at a local mill. It's in her county, and they turn it into yarn, but they also weave her yarn into blankets and various things, and I was so excited. It was a breed of wool I'd never heard, and it was black, and I thought it'd be so interesting, and so I bought yarn, a sweater's quantity worth of yarn for my birthday, and I received the wool, and I continued looking for other yarns made from different wool breeds, and I was not having any luck in the local yarn shops. It was all like merino and Peruvian Highland wool and maybe some Shetland, but there just wasn't much that I could find in my local shops. So I went to the local fiber festival that spring, and that was when I realized, oh, what I need to do is learn to spin. I had been actively not learning to spin for 13 years. And I thought, oh, well, now it's time. And I just decided to do it. That Zwartbles yarn, that's the yarn I used to knit this Aran sweater. And there were so many things that were different about this yarn than I was used to. First of all, it was woolen spun. It was a 2-ply and it was woolen spun and it was very dark. And so it really also took me on the path of understanding more about yarn construction, even in commercially spun yarns. So this sweater and that breed of sheep really got me started on the path of really understanding more about yarn than I had previously understood. So I'm excited about the last one. In the meantime, I got a package in the mail yesterday. I haven't opened it yet. Last summer, I found out about a Kickstarter program for it was called Project Lonk. So Lonk is a traditional breed of sheep from Yorkshire. And I have a special love for Yorkshire because that's where the Richardsons came from. I have a lot of ancestors who came from a lot of other places, but the ones that had my surname came from Yorkshire. And so it's a young couple. They have a flock of lonk sheep and they have some white-faced woodland as well. And they partnered with a local knit designer who does machine knitting, who lives within a couple miles of them. And then she knew about a mill that was very close by because they had been selling their wool to the net sort of international wool pool type of thing. And they really wanted to see their wool turned into yarn and be used by knitters. And so they created this Kickstarter program and they got more than enough support to see their project through. And they were even able to add a second breed. The white-faced woodland sheep that they have as well, they were able to add to this project. They thought they were going to have to wait another year. Well, as all of the wool got processed in the mill, it got washed first. It loses a lot of volume from washing. And then they had estimated ahead of time how much combed top that would be available for spinners, and then how much of that would be turned into yarn, coned yarn or skeined yarn for knitters. They had overestimated the amount that they would end up with, and they weren't going to have enough lonk. And so they said to some of the people who had supported the lonk, would you mind switching to the white-faced woodland? And I didn't care. I was fine. I can always get lonk next year. So I ordered it, and they sent us updates, every couple of weeks, what was going on. They had all these people in their local town helping to package things up, and they were saving their local post office, which had been sort of earmarked to be closed down. And they shipped everything out by the end of December, and it was supposed to take 2 to 8 weeks. And people started getting their shipments, and mine didn't come. And I went and I looked, and I'm like, what's taking so long? And they said, well, it could take up to 8 weeks. Still hadn't arrived at the end of January. And I thought, the way things are working these days, it could just take way longer. I have ordered books from the UK before, and they come in a week, and one time it came after 8 weeks. So sometimes things just get held up. And I wasn't the only one whose yarn was held up in the US. I just kept waiting, and I kept waiting, and it came yesterday. So I got my box of wool of my white-faced woodland. I have not opened it yet, and so I'm going to do that now in front of you guys. So it took, you can see the postmark on here was December 20th. It took 11 and a half weeks. It took 80 days for this package to get here. And it's not their fault that the Postal Service did that. And like I said, I wasn't in a huge hurry, so I was willing to wait. I trusted them. So it came with some postcards. Look at that sheep. Look at that. Look at that sheep. And then I believe this is the couple along with the knitwear designer. The two couple I think are flanking the designer in the middle. So it's so much wool, you guys. It's like, I think it's a kilogram of wool, of combed tops. So this whole box is just full of wool. I'm very excited. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I have plenty of time to try different things. And one of the things, oh, it smells like sheep. I just love that smell. One of the things that I will probably do is I have this kit behind me that I bought. I bought this probably a year and a half ago. It's a dye kit, and I've been wanting to experiment with that. And so I think this would be an ideal thing to do some experiment of dyeing, doing some experiments like dyeing the comb top versus dyeing the yarn versus dyeing a swatch that was knit from it. So to kind of doing those things and seeing what that is like. And if I have a preference for when I introduce dye into the whole process. There's plenty of wool here to turn into all kinds of things. I'll have to figure out what that is going to be. The wool that I currently have on my bobbins that I have to ply is the same breed as this. It was obviously processed from a different flock and whatever. So it'll be interesting to spin with this and then see what that's like compared to what I've got on my bobbins as well. And I have plenty I can try spinning in all different sorts of ways. One of the things that I love to knit is socks. When I learned to knit socks back in 2005, I'm going to say, I mostly focused on socks for myself and my kids. I made them some socks, and my mother, who I knew would always appreciate them. One person I didn't think about knitting socks for at the beginning was my brother. My brother has always appreciated hand knit things, handmade things. He's a woodworker. He always appreciates that kind of thing, but my brother has enormous feet. And the prospect of knitting socks for him was always daunting. I did knit a few pair for my husband, whose feet are more average. His legs are more average size. He's got kind of longish feet, but you know, his circumference of his leg and feet isn't anything that isn't average. But my brother is 6'3" and he's a big guy, and he's got enormous circumference feet and ankles. And so the thought of knitting socks for him, it just seemed like it would take forever. And also, my husband, it isn't that he doesn't appreciate or use hand knit socks. He just has such average sized feet. It's very easy for him to just buy a 12-pack of wool socks at Costco. And he looks at the amount of work that I put into a pair of socks, and he doesn't feel like it's worth it for him. He absolutely wants me to knit other things for him. He's happy to have those, but he doesn't really need or feel like he wants more pairs of hand knit socks. So my brother came to visit here in Minneapolis back in like 2009 or something, and we went to the yarn shop. We went to a woodworking shop because that was something he wanted to do, and then we went to my local yarn shop, and he was just so interested in everything in the yarn shop and all the things that they sold. And he looked at a sock that was on display, and I'm like, oh, you like that colorway? Because I had made myself a pair of socks with that colorway, and it never occurred to me that he would want that. He's like, oh yeah, I really like it. They had the yarn in a 6-ply. I had always made socks for myself in 4-ply yarn, and that was what I dreaded in terms of making something for my brother. But they had a 6-ply yarn, and it was a delightful colorway that I really liked. And the amount of work that went into knitting those socks wasn't any more than it took to knit my own. So I knit him a pair of socks, and that was it. He got his one-hand knit pair of socks from me. I also didn't come across much 6-ply sock yarn after that. It just wasn't something that I saw very often. But a few years later, there was a yarn company. It was an online company called Elon that I bought yarn from quite a lot. And they said something in their monthly Facebook about, oh, upload a photo of something you've made with our yarn and, you know, show us what you made or something. And so, and I think they had like a monthly drawing for people who did that. Well, I won the drawing. So I got $50 of credit to spend. And so I went and looked to see what they had, and I saw they had sock yarn. And I bought some, and I bought some that I made a pair of socks for myself that I don't wear very often, but it was 6-ply yarn. And so I made a pair of socks for him. And so then I'd made him 2 pairs of socks. A few more years go by, and I was working on figuring out a really exact way of calculating how to make a short row heel or a peasant heel fit any person's foot, especially if they have like a high arch or something that would make a short row heel or a peasant heel difficult to fit, and because I'm one of those people. So I figured it out to make them fit me, but his feet are such different proportions, I wasn't sure that my formulas were going to work on his feet. So when I was in Michigan, I said, take off your sock, I'm going to measure your heel diagonal. And he was wearing a pair of, you know, white commercial, like cotton, you know, like regular old socks. He pulled them off, and there were all these red marks on his legs. So I saw these red marks on his legs, and I said something to him about it. And he's like, yeah, but the socks you knit for me don't do that. And I thought, oh. Then I had a mission, because I knew he liked the fact that I made socks for him and that he wore them, but I didn't really understand that he really benefited from them. Like my husband, like I said, he's like, yeah, you know, I can use them, but I can buy socks at the store just as easily, and I'm perfectly happy with them. But my brother really could use something that was custom fit for him. So I've knit him a new pair of socks just about every year. So I had finished a pair of socks for him, I think in December, and I was getting ready to mail them out to him. And he texted me and said, oh, I had my first blowout in a pair of socks. I think he's like, it's one of the first pairs you knit for me. And I said, well, you can send them back. I might be able to fix them. You know, it's not something I do for my own socks, because I have so many pairs of socks that I don't tend to wear them out. And if I do, by the time I do wear a pair of socks out, I'm usually kind of over them, and I'm happy to knit myself a new pair. I probably have 30 to 35 pairs of hand knit socks in my own sock drawer. So I have plenty of socks. Last week, I got a package in the mail, and it was the socks. And these are those socks. And I'm going to go to the overhead, because I had to figure out which, only one of the socks has a hole in the heel. But these were in such a state of like fuzziness and the kind of felted. He was telling me that this was one of the pairs of socks that had kind of felted a little bit, and they were kind of hard to get past his heel. But once he got past them, they still fit, but they kind of shrunk in the length. And so I'm looking at these, I'm like, oh my God, why would I send these back? But I'm like, he's still wearing them. So I'm going to fix them. I did fix them. I made a patch, and I'll go to the overhead and I'll show you what I did. But it just showed me the difference between how I treat a pair of socks that gets to this state and how he treats them. And part of it is he doesn't have very many of them, and I've got lots of them, and I'm like, I can just throw them away. But I also had to talk to him a little bit about how he's washing them. This is a brand that I didn't even remember what the brand was, and it's discontinued. It's one that I haven't really heard of before. And it's clearly one that after a while, the machine washing maybe doesn't work as well. There are some socks where the machine washability of the wool seems to wear off over time, and then the socks will start to felt. So I have decided I will only knit socks for him using Regia. The first pair I knit for him was from Regia. They're still going strong. They're still among his favorites. And they have a 10-year guarantee. None of my Regia socks have worn out. I love it. It wears like iron, and he's probably not going to end up with 30 pairs of socks in his sock drawer that I've hand knit for him the way I have in my own. So I want to make sure that I knit socks for him that are going to last. In many ways, it's sort of like, aw, I knit those socks for you. I knit these socks for him in 2013. These socks are 9 years old. And so to me, that is a great lifespan for a pair of socks. It doesn't mean they don't have more life in them, but you know, you can't really expect a pair of socks to last that long, I don't think, in normal circumstances. I'm actually very pleased to see the socks in this state because it shows how much he's worn them. It shows that he cared enough about continuing to wear them that he actually mailed them back to me when I said he could and that I would fix them. You know, there's knitworthy and then there's knitworthy, and I think my brother is definitely knitworthy. So these are those socks. They're very fuzzy. I tried all of my different, you know, fuzz removers, and none of them are really working that well. They really are kind of felted. They're very stiff. They're not as stretchy. The soles of the socks aren't so bad. And it was kind of felted, so it was a little, you know, trying to decide how I was going to fix these. And, you know, I think he's going to be able to feel this on the sole of his foot. But I picked up stitches wider than the width of the hole, and then I knit a little patch, and then I grafted it to here, and then I did like sewed it on the sides here, and then I turned it inside out, and I took some finer like reinforcing yarn and kind of went around the edges of the holes and crisscrossed so that it would hold the edges together. I used so much of a ball of yarn in order to make him a pair of socks. There's really never much in the way of leftovers. So I couldn't have really knit him a new foot, and it's so felted anyway that I think it would have been really hard. So for me, I'm happy with putting this one patch on it. Maybe he can wear them around the house, or maybe he'll decide they're not comfortable enough to wear. That's fine. In the meantime, I started him a new pair of socks. One of his comments about this old pair was that, you know, the length had shrunk. And when I sent him the pair I knit him in December, I had made the leg a little bit longer than I had in the past. I'd done the calculation. I could see that I would have enough yarn to do that. And still keep the stripes matching on both socks. And he said he really liked the length of those new ones. I told him with this pair that I could do one of two things in order to ensure that the legs are longer. One is that I could knit the heel with a contrast color. I have some black 6-ply yarn. I could have used that. Or if he didn't care about matching stripes, and I think with this particular striping pattern, it kind of fools the eye enough that it wouldn't matter. He said he was happy with a contrast heel or non-matching stripes. He didn't care. So then I thought, well, this is perfect for the toe-up situation where I don't have to worry about the stripes. I don't have to get mad about them being slightly off at the heel. I just divided the ball into equal halves and started at the toe, and I'll just keep going. So I'm really happy about making these for him, fixing the sock for him, and seeing how well loved these socks have been over the years. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're not already subscribed, please consider doing so. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rox Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.